welcome to ACFIM Talks. Very good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are and you are listening and watching from today, the 25th of March 2021. And on the sad note, we continue to mourn as a country for the loss of the Right Honorable Jacob Olanya, who has been the Speaker of Parliament for the 11th Parliament. And in that regard, let's observe a moment of silence as we honor him. And may his soul rest in peace. Okay, today we are discussing a very interesting topic, delay in finding premises for the electoral committee, and this topic has been flagged off by a news report that appeared early in the week. But before we start, allow me to first welcome everybody and encourage you to be part of this conversation by subscribing to our social media platforms. We are live on Facebook. It's down there on the stream, live on Facebook, live on Twitter, and also live on YouTube. And you can be able to send in your questions, your comments, and we'll be able to pick them up. And I'm joined by two gentlemen. So far, one is with me in the studio. We are expecting the second gentleman to be with us anytime soon. But before I introduce them, let me kind of like provide an intro or a context within which this discussion is going to be placed. As you all remember, or if you've been following that, you should be aware that there have been efforts to relocate the headquarters of the Uganda's Electoral Commission to a new home. And these efforts have been punctuated by delays, intrigue, and infighting. In fact, the relocation is intended to pave way for the construction of the first ever flyover in Kampala, the capital of Uganda. This relocation should have taken place by 2019, but the commission requested for a stay on the grounds that they had a general election coming up in 2021. It is now a year and 1 month since the elections were completed, and yet there are no signs of electoral commission moving soon. And this would further delay the completion of the project, and it has serious implications on the cost of the flyover project. It has been reported that a Ugandan taxpayer would incur shillings 300 million daily in fines to the contractor for the delays arising out of EC's continued stay. A whistleblower has raised concerns over unending fights for money by top government officials who have to gain from the deal by selling Electoral Commission their buildings. So far, all the 7 premises presented in the bidding process have been rejected on grounds that they are not fit for purpose. In a later dated 7th March, which I have a copy with me, 2022, this year, the president of Uganda, President Yoweri Museveni, directed all those concerned to resolve the issue. And when you read between the lines, the Electoral Commission seems to prefer an 18-acre property located in a wetland that is valued at 111 billion Uganda shillings. This and much more underpins our discussion for today's ACFIM Talks. Again, welcome to yet another edition of ACFIM Talks. And with me to dissect and understand the issue behind the issue, the story behind the story, I have with me in the studio been joined by 2 gallant Ugandans. Let me start by introducing Henry Muguzi, who is a regular panelist on this show. Henry Muguzi is an electoral democracy expert and an anti-corruption activist. He's also a researcher and the executive director for Alliance for Finance Monitoring. Henry, you're most welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Felix.
Thank you. And the other panelists who I have with me is no stranger to such spaces, is none other than Alex Atuhaire, who is a veteran journalist and editor with wealth of experience. He's also an entrepreneur, currently runs the online publisher company, that is Kampala Report, and is also the editorial director at PNL Daily. You are most welcome, Alex, to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm super excited to be in this space. A bit of my, my media background has always been in the legacy media, so I'm really very excited when I come to these spaces, which is the media of today and tomorrow.
Thank you so much, Alex. It's good to have you. And let's get this started. And I think I'll start with you, Alex. I'm sure you've been following as an investigative reporter, as a journalist. You must have followed the developments around the Electoral Commission concerning their relocation to a new premise. But there's a lot, what has been reported in the media presupposes that there's more than meets the eye. And going by your background, what is the story behind the story of EC's delayed relocation? What is it that we don't know that we should know?
I think, Felix, thank you for the question. And really, it is a valid question. Because when we look at this issue, the EC knew 6 years ago that they should have left where they are 6 years ago. And considering where they are, and they have run the last 4 cycle of elections from that place, it was actually an opportunity that development of a road was going, and it was an opportunity for them to acquire headquarters or premises that can fit the kind of role that they play within our public spaces. Now, it is absolutely surprising that 6 years later, the guys are still there. And I think for me, number one, this is shows the highest level of incompetence in our public offices. Then number two, the question was framed for this show that is it politics or is it corruption? I'm quite very sure that it is a bit of both, but maybe a bit more of the corruption side. I used to be an investigations editor, and when the PPDA was being set up, the effort was to help in corruption, especially in the procurement cycle. And that is how it manifests itself. I have seen the background article. An article appeared in one of the major, on our major media at the weekend, and they have advertised this project 6 times, and they have failed to conclude the procurement. I think no matter how the corruption manifests itself in this procurement cycle, a big project like this one, when the issue comes up, then there are several people, either within the entity or it's outside the entity, who say you cannot. I have seen that one of the prepositions maybe is the premises that they had earmarked is about $30 million, quoted at $30 million. Now, there are people in this town, there are people in our public life, there are people in our public offices who believe that you cannot spend $30 million, which is about 100 billion, without them benefiting. So normally, if that kind of caliber of people fail to benefit from the procurement, then they must frustrate it. My suspicion is that the efforts to look for a home for the EC, it's not actually a suspicion, it's the story behind the story. the effort for the EC to look for a new home has been frustrated because some people who feel that they should benefit privately from the procurement maybe think that they will lose out. That's what I have heard so far.
All right. Thank you, Alex. Let me come to you, Henry, on this one. Alex points out corruption seems to be the underlying currents with this ping pong concerning the relocation of electoral commission. Let me come to you as an anti-corruption activist, Henry. What should we read into this ping pong?
Thank you, Felix. And of course, I start by adding my voice to the millions of Ugandans that are grieving the departure of a gallant son of the soil, Honorable Jacob Olanya, and also express gratitude for sharing a platform with my colleague at arms, Alex. Now, as you will understand that I think it's important for Ugandans to understand the importance of this institution. There is a sense in which Uganda seems to have agreed that democracy will be the best form of governance going forward. And you cannot have democracy without a body, an institution that stands at the center of it. So the Electoral Commission in this regard is the bastion of democracy in this country. Now, I do know that from 6 years back, the original plan was to construct premises for the Electoral Commission. As you have seen, may have noticed, government's policy is more leaning towards constructing premises for offices, which is why Insurance Regulatory Authority has constructed, PPD has constructed, National Drug Authority has constructed. So the Electoral Commission approached Uganda Land Commission and asked for land on which to construct new premises. The Uganda Land Commission, until now, has come back and came back after 3 years and said, look, we have failed to find land. We cannot locate land. What that meant is that now the issue of land cannot be found. But the irony is that on the sidelines, the same Uganda Land Commission was able to find land in Nakawa Naguru housing estate, which it allocated to 50 private individuals and companies. But at the same time, they're telling Electoral Commission, we cannot find land, which takes you to the question, the issue that Alex raises of frustration. So then you discover that, oh, there must be a force underneath that is frustrating the efforts of constructing new premises for the EC. Because then if they construct, those who own properties that they want to sell won't be able to sell. So frustrate them, they don't build, so they come to us. Because what is given is that the flyover has to go on. As a matter of fact, it already started. Therefore, relocating the headquarters of the Electoral Commission is out of the question. Now, so push them to the limit. So those who frustrated the Uganda Land Commission, it is not true, as we know now, that Uganda Land Commission failed to find premises. And indeed, for an institution such as the Electoral Commission, it would be very difficult to find premises and already constructed kind of building that is fit for purpose because of what they do. So they were frustrated, that we understand. Now, came to the issue of procuring. You recall that this institution has been plagued with corruption. And therefore, I will not be surprised to see that the reason there are these delays is because there could be a number of these scheming and scrupulous government officials who have owned, properties across the town that each want to make sure they are the ones who are best evaluated. And therefore, if they sense a situation where they are not likely to go through, then they sabotage. This is where we are. So I think it is more, again, of corruption than politics that we are seeing all these delays.
Okay. Thank you, Henry, because you raise an issue to do with their vested interests. Now let me come to you, Alex. Who stands to gain from this ping pong between EC moving, not moving, we are not moving, there's land here, no land here? Who stands to benefit?
We may have to first go with that who loses. It is us. These are public resources, so we are losers already. And of course, the people who gain will be the people we talked about, and Henry also talks about that. The people who maybe own some of these things, and they are going to fight, and the person who wins the fight, and then will gain with his group. But having said that, let me come to the issue of the president's letter. Because when you started the show, you quoted the president's letter, and I was absolutely, when I was given a call to come to this show, I tried to do some research, basic research, and I was absolutely very, very surprised that the president can write a letter that is absolutely misleading, both in terms of fact and context. And that one only goes to confirm my suspicion that maybe the people who are vending these things using the IGG, they will use those offices. They will use the IGG. They will use whatever office, and then of course when they get the procurement for their premises to be bought, then they will gain. Of course, just a few people will gain. Yeah, that was your question.
Mm-hmm.
But I was disappointed that the president's letter writing now visibly to support his friend Dr. Lule, then say the other premise that has been identified is in a wetland. Now I tried to find out what premises they were talking about. Then I was told it was where a school was, an international school, games. And I know I have played football there with colleagues from my contemporaries from Ontario School. They used to play their league there at the football pitch owned by Games, and I was surprised that the president could write a letter that was so lacking in terms of facts and context. So, I mean that tells you that just a few people are maybe the president's friends, Professor Rule. They will, at the end of the day, gain from this delay.
Wow, thank you, Henry. Alex is referring to a letter, and I hope that my producer can flash that later. In that letter, which is dated 7th March 2022, the president informs one of the owners, Professor Godfrey Rule. He informs him about the process, but he's very quick to I think direct the other parties involved to resolve the matter. And I would ask myself, help us understand here, why would the president, who is supposed to preoccupy himself with macro matters, then pick interest in such a micro issue that I think EC can handle itself? What is the interest of the president in such a matter?
Thank you very much. You see, when you look at this letter, you can read a lot. Every time I look at that letter, I pick out an angle. But let me try to present some of the few things, interpretations I make from this letter. Number one, the question you ask, which is a founded one. Why would the head of state, the fountain of honor, who is supposed to concern himself with macro issues, geopolitical issues, international issues, policy issues, get to descend into the arena and direct on a matter which would be so trivial? Never mind that democracy is important, the institution is important. Number one, the spirit of writing this letter undermines the independence of the institution of the Electoral Commission, which is one thing they have been, the detractors have been highlighting, the lack of independence of the Electoral Commission. Because now, who are you, the head of the procurement unit of the Electoral Commission, to even decide otherwise? It's like the axe is hovering over your head. That's number one. Number two, why would the president write to one Professor Godfrey Roulet and reveal such information, such as there is another property, and then he mentions it, and then also the numbers? By telling him the numbers, he's actually telling him, you see, if you had quoted below, you should actually up the numbers. But also, why do you put him in a ping pong situation? You get two bidders and pit them against each other. What are you trying to achieve? What are you telling us by writing to you? So who is Lule? How do you relate with him as president? And why is this so much of your interest? What interest do you have as president? Having said that, then there is the other element. I'm saying I'm directing these matters to resolve. Now, look at who he copies this letter to. The Right Honorable Prime Minister. Why is he copying the Right Honorable Prime Minister? Of course, he's the leader of government business. But there's another interesting one. Copies Attorney General. But it goes ahead to copy the Inspector General of Government. The Inspector General of Government is the one who is mandated to probe corruption. Is the president sensing corruption in this matter, or confirming there is corruption? Is he telling the IGG that by copying you in, I am kind of giving you a heads up, or I'm directing you to pick interest in this matter? Why is he doing this? Okay. And then he kept copies, of course, the chairperson of the Electoral Commission. So if you are the chairperson, you've seen the president writing this. You see, when you read the letter, it is like he's directing that I'm directing you, Electoral Commission, to go for the property of my good friend, Professor Godfrey Roulet. This is peddling influence. And influence peddling is a form of corruption. Does the president know that he's engaging in corruption and in an act of corruption? And that said, does the president even know the specifications of the kind of building the Electoral Commission wants? So on what premise is he choosing between Lule and the other wetland? Of course, the other question would be, why would the Electoral Commission want to go into another wetland? But is it even a wetland, or is he signposting wrongly? Which Alex will tell us, because he has played football there. So when you played football there, did you see frogs and fish around? In which case, is it a wetland? That's what he will tell us. But why would the head of state undermine an institution that is supposed to be independent, which has been characteristic over the last 30 years? Because today, if I asked you to point out one institution in this country that is operating independently, that is functioning independently as an institution should, you might fail to locate to mention one. So he has continued with his maneuvers of weakening institutions, which I think is not good. So the spirit of this letter in itself is undermining, disempowering the institution of the Electoral Commission. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Henry. This is interesting. Alex, I want to bring you in here, and I want to read verbatim here. I think it's it's the last part of, because it says, by copy of this letter, I direct all concerned to logically resolve this issue, because where electoral commission offices are today needs to be vacated in order to complete the construction of the overhead road. I think he meant the flyover when he said overhead road. Now, when do we draw the distinction between the president? When does a directive from the president presuppose an order? How do you interpret, if you were prime minister, you were EC, how do you interpret such a letter?
It's an order. I think the constitution is very clear. When the president directs something, it has to be done in that direction. I think the constitution gives him a lot of powers to to give this kind of directive. Now, of course, it also gives him the audacity to make sure that the basis of his directives are in public interest. So maybe what we need to discuss here is that these kind of presidential directives on a procurement issue, do you think it is in public interest? For me, I think it is wrong for the president to involve him in procurement affairs of entities, because then he exerts undue pressure on the entities, and they may end up making either procedural or mistakes on the basis of the pressure of a presidential directive. So I think in the first place, we need to discourage the president, though the constitution gives him the authority to issue these kinds of directives. We need to bring it upon the president that involving himself, like in this procurement matter, is in the first place, it's wrong. It's wrong. And it has not happened for the first time. It has happened before. It has happened in different places. I mean, in different government departments. And in some instances, the results have been disastrous. I can point out one instance where he involved himself with the directives in the procurement of helicopters for the army. I think that was in the 90s, in the late 90s. And you know the kind of results that we got, because he was trying to protect some of his family friends who had identified vendors for those helicopters. And the army ended up procuring junk helicopters. In that realm, you would think that the president's letter on this matter is something that should be discouraged always. Now, that brings me to the question of whether there is a wetland on the premises that the president, because my co-panelist, Henry, asked me that, is there a wetland in the place?
Yes.
I think there's a wetland besides there's a wetland besides the premises that are being talked about, but there actually no wetland in the premises that are being talked about. In the realm of actually, I don't care who gets the procurement, so long as the matter is resolved in public interest. In the realm of what we are talking about, I think as it stands now, those premises that hosted the school already have buildings and quarters and amenities that can serve as EC warehouses. Now, I would think that when I was inquiring, I did some research. When I was asking one of the reporters who has interfaced with this story, he told me that when these premises were put up by the vendor, and then some people approached that vendor. It is a story I have got from somebody who has researched and written on the story in the media, and said he cannot take all that money, so he needs to negotiate. I think the vendor is stubborn, so he did not negotiate. So I'm told that's how the president later ended, because they told him, if you do not, then we shall use some other authority, and you will not be successful. It is something that can be verified by whoever wants to verify it, but it's something that I have had. Then I'm told that is how the president's letter resurfaced, because there is somebody who wants to benefit from the procurement and they are not able to benefit, and they say, let's stop it. So that is the kind of confusion that we are talking about.
Alex, is that person internal within EC, all these other outside forces that control what happens in EC?
I am told it is some outside forces that controls what happens in the EC. So they are the ones who actually have even the capacity to influence what the president writes. That's a wetland. And I'm afraid that the president's letter is lacking in terms of facts. In terms of facts, it is absolutely lacking. So that's what surprises me. But what frustrates me more is that a government entity for 6 years is not able to deliver on a procurement like this.
Okay. We are going for a break, but when we come back, we'll pick it up from there, because again, I need to quote something concerning the way the president reports about the wetland, because there's something in there for us to mull over. Let's go for a break, and when we return, we pick it up from there.